A wounded woman fell in the street, but she didn't imagine that a millionaire and his son would pause in their gleaming black car, just as the rain began to pour in cold, unmerciful sheets. She tried to lift herself, but her vision shimmered with pain and exhaustion. Passers-by hurried past, clutching their umbrellas tighter, glancing briefly before averting their eyes, unwilling to disrupt their own lives for the sake of a stranger bleeding onto the pavement. But inside the car, Marcus Beaumont watched her with a gaze that betrayed something deeper than pity. For years, he had hidden his compassion behind a fortress of wealth and ambition, convincing himself that charity was best delegated to faceless organizations and tax-deductible foundations. Yet as he studied the woman struggling to breathe, something ancient and human stirred beneath the tailored suit and polished demeanor. Beside him, his son Henry, only 12 years old, leaned forward, his small face pale with alarm. "Dad," he whispered, "we have to help her." For a moment, Marcus hesitated. The night was already chaotic. He was due at a critical negotiation that could net his corporation billions. But as Henry's hand pressed urgently to his sleeve, Marcus realized that there were moments when life demanded more than profit. It demanded decency. Without another word, he threw open the door, stepping into the rain. The woman flinched as he knelt beside her. Her dark hair was plastered to her cheek, mingled with the thin stream of blood seeping from a gash above her brow. She looked at him with hollow bewilderment, as though unable to decide whether he was real or some fevered apparition. "You're safe," Marcus murmured, his voice low and steady. "Can you tell me your name?" She swallowed with effort, her lips cracked and colorless. "Elena." Henry had scrambled from the car and was now holding an umbrella over them, his skinny arms trembling from the effort. Elena's gaze shifted to the boy, and something fragile sparked in her eyes, a flicker of gratitude that managed to glow even through the haze of suffering. Gently, Marcus slid an arm around her shoulders. "We're going to get you help, Elena." "No hospital," she rasped, panic rising. "Please, not there." Marcus studied her face, noting the bruises along her collarbone and the haunted way she kept glancing over her shoulder as though expecting a phantom to materialize from the shadows. Whoever she was running from, she was more terrified of them than of dying here in the rain. "All right," he said after a moment, his mind moving with the quiet precision that had made him a titan of industry. "No hospital. But you can't stay on the street." He turned to Henry. "Help me get her into the car." Together, father and son eased Elena into the back seat. She sagged against the leather upholstery, breathing in short, ragged gasps. Henry climbed in beside her without hesitation, holding her hand in both of his. She looked down at his small fingers wrapped around hers, and a single tear spilled from her swollen eye. Marcus slid into the driver's seat, ignoring the rain dripping from his hair onto the collar of his shirt. As he started the engine, he caught Henry's reflection in the mirror, a boy whose innocence had not yet been crushed by the world's indifference. For an instant, Marcus felt humbled by his own child's unfiltered compassion. He pulled away from the curb, steering the car toward his penthouse in the heart of the city. There, he knew, she could rest without questions, without threats. As he drove, the rain hammered the windshield, blurring the city lights into smears of gold and blue. Elena shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Henry spoke before Marcus could. "Because no one else did," he said simply. The rest of the ride was silent except for the rhythmic thud of the wipers. When they reached the private underground garage, Marcus parked and turned to her, his face solemn but kind. "You don't have to be afraid here," he told her. "I don't know what you've been through, but you have my word. No one will hurt you while you're under my roof." Her gaze flickered to Henry again, as if drawing strength from the boy's unwavering eyes. She gave the faintest nod. With practiced care, Marcus lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he wondered how long she had been running, how long she had been starving herself to stay hidden. Henry held the elevator door open, his expression fierce with protective determination. Up in the penthouse, the vast, glass-walled living room felt like a different universe from the cold, rain-slicked street. Marcus carried Elena to a long velvet sofa and eased her down. As he stepped back, she looked so small against the cushions it made his chest ache. Henry disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a bottle of water and a soft cloth. Marcus watched as his son pressed the cloth gently to Elena's forehead, as though he had done it 100 times before. In that moment, Marcus understood that he was no longer the same man who had climbed into the back of a chauffeured car every day. convinced that charity was something signed on a check. He was something else now. Elena looked up at both of them, father and son, strangers who had become her only refuge, and tried to speak, but her voice broke into a sob she could no longer hold back. Henry reached for her hand again, squeezing it with quiet certainty. And in the soft glow of the penthouse lights, Marcus Beaumont realized that sometimes the most important investments had nothing to do with money at all. Elena's tears slid silently down her cheeks, glistening against the bruises like fragile drops of mercy. She turned her face away, ashamed that she couldn't contain her emotions in front of these people who had no reason to care. But Henry didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he leaned closer, his small voice steady. "You don't have to cry alone," he whispered. "It's okay." His words cracked something in her that she hadn't even realized was still unbroken. She pressed her free hand over her mouth, as though she could dam the sobs with sheer will, but her body was too exhausted, too battered. A tremor passed through her, and Marcus quietly stepped out of the room, returning moments later with a soft woolen blanket. He draped it over her shoulders without saying a word. For a long time, none of them spoke. The rain on the glass sounded like 1,000 tiny heartbeats, steady and insistent. Elena's breathing began to slow, though her eyes remained open, darting around the elegant room as if to memorize every detail. "You're safe," Marcus said again, his tone low but absolute. "No one here will betray you." Elena drew in a shaky breath. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied simply. "Rest first. Later, when you feel stronger, you can tell us whatever you wish, or nothing at all." Henry let go of her hand only long enough to pull a chair closer, so he could sit beside her without straining. The boy watched her with an intensity that belied his age, and she wondered what kind of childhood he must have had to look at a stranger with so much gentleness. "Would you like something to eat?" Marcus asked. She hesitated, her hunger warring with her fear. "Only if it's no trouble." "It isn't," he assured her, already moving to the kitchen. "Henry, stay with her." Elena tried to protest, but the boy only smiled shyly, as though guarding her was a privilege. She felt the strangest ache in her chest, part grief, part gratitude so fierce it nearly hurt. When Marcus returned, he held a tray with warm soup and a slice of buttered bread. He set it on the low table within her reach, but made no move to push it on her. She glanced at the bowl, then back at him, as though needing permission to take even this small comfort. "It's for you," Marcus said softly. "You don't have to ask." Her hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. The first mouthful made her eyes sting again, the simple taste of warmth and salt almost unbearable after so many days without. She forced herself to eat slowly, and each swallow seemed to restore a tiny piece of herself she'd thought forever lost. When she finally looked up, she found Marcus studying her with the thoughtful, appraising look of a man who spent his life reading contracts and people in equal measure. But there was no judgment in his gaze, only a patient curiosity. "Will you tell me if you need anything?" he asked. She nodded. Yes. Thank you." Henry leaned forward. "Where did you come from?" Elena hesitated, her spoon hovering over the bowl. The boy's eyes were so earnest, so utterly trusting, that she couldn't bring herself to lie. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "Far away. From someone who hurt me." Henry's lips pressed together, his brow furrowing. "My mom used to say that nobody deserves that." "Nobody." Marcus closed his eyes for an instant, a flicker of pain crossing his features, and she realized that perhaps they too had lost something precious. She didn't ask. She was too tired to unravel her own history, let alone theirs. She finished the soup slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her hollow belly like a promise that maybe tomorrow she would be stronger. Maybe tomorrow she would stand without flinching. As she set the spoon aside, Henry reached for her hand again, as if to remind her she wasn't alone. She let him, feeling the smallest corner of her fear begin to loosen its grip. "You can stay here," Marcus said quietly, "as long as you need to. This is not a temporary kindness. I don't do things halfway." She searched his face for any trace of pity she couldn't bear, but she saw only a quiet conviction that made her throat ache. "I don't know why you do this," she whispered. "Because I can," he replied, "and because my son is right. No one deserves to be left in the rain." Henry nodded solemnly, as though he had decided long before that this woman belonged here, under their protection. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Elena felt the tiniest glimmer of hope, an ember she thought had been drowned long ago. She closed her eyes and let her body lean back into the cushions, her hand still in Henry's, her heartbeat finally beginning to slow. The rain continued to tap against the windows in quiet rhythm, and she listened to it without the usual dread, imagining that maybe it was washing something away. Maybe this was what it felt like to begin again. In the soft hush that settled over the penthouse, Elena felt the strangest sensation, a peace she hadn't known in years. It was fragile as spun glass, but it filled the aching hollows behind her ribs. She drifted somewhere between exhaustion and awareness, listening to the rain and the quiet breath of the boy beside her. Hours passed in a gentle blur. She woke only when Marcus returned to the living room, this time carrying a folded piece of linen and a small, carved wooden box. He set them carefully on the table and sat across from her, his gaze steady. "There's something I want you to have," he said. Elena swallowed, her voice weak. "I can't take anything more." "You can," he interrupted gently. "And you will, because it's not about charity. It's about respect." She watched as he lifted the lid of the box to reveal a simple gold pendant. The design was delicate, a tree with spreading branches, each tiny leaf etched in intricate detail. Marcus held it out to her in his palm. "My wife wore this," he said quietly. She believed that no matter how broken a person became, there was always a root, a part of them that could grow again if someone would only care enough to help. Elena's throat tightened so painfully she thought she might not be able to breathe. "I can't," she whispered again. "You can," Marcus insisted. "Not because you owe me anything. You don't. But because you survived. You're still here. That deserves to be honored." Her hand trembled as she reached for the pendant, brushing his fingers. The warmth of it settled into her skin, and she closed her fist around it as though she might never let go. Henry watched her with wide, earnest eyes. "Dad says this house is too big, that it feels empty all the time." Marcus's gaze softened, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Maybe it was waiting for you," he said simply. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time she didn't turn away to hide them. She let them fall, let them trace clean paths over the bruises. They were not tears of fear. They were not born of defeat. They were something closer to release. When her breath returned, she looked from father to son and saw a strange kind of grace there. Two people who had lost something irreplaceable, but who had chosen to open their door anyway. "I never thought," she began, her voice catching. "I never thought I would matter to anyone again." Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You matter," he said in a low voice that carried more weight than any proclamation of wealth. "Not because of what you've been through, or because you need help, but because you are here. Because you chose to survive. That's enough." Henry reached out, his small hand brushing her shoulder. "I'm glad you're here." And in that moment, she believed it. That night, Marcus insisted she rest in the guest suite, a room with tall windows overlooking the rain-washed city. The bed was soft and warm, the air faintly scented with lavender. When she lay down, she half expected her body to reject the comfort, to tense with the old reflex of waiting for pain to follow every kindness. But the darkness held no threat. She slept so deeply she didn't dream. Morning brought a hush of pale gold light streaming over the floorboards. Elena woke slowly, blinking against the brightness. For the first time in so long she could not measure, she did not feel the urge to run. Her heart was quiet. Her limbs, though bruised, were steady. When she opened the door, she found Henry sitting cross-legged on the floor just outside, a book open in his lap. He looked up and grinned. "I didn't want you to wake up alone," he explained. She smiled back, the gesture so unfamiliar it almost startled her. "Thank you." Marcus appeared at the end of the hall, dressed simply in jeans and a charcoal sweater. He looked less like a mogul and more like any other man, tired, determined, quietly kind. "You're up," he said, relief flickering across his face. "How do you feel?" "Better," she admitted. "Strange, but better." "Then we'll start from there," he replied. Breakfast was warm bread and fruit in the glass-walled kitchen. No one asked her to explain more than she could bear. No one pressed her for stories she wasn't ready to tell. Instead, they spoke of small things: Henry's plans for school, the weather, a stray cat that had started visiting the garage. The ordinariness of it all felt extraordinary. When she finally looked down at the pendant resting against her collarbone, she felt something shift deep inside her, a certainty that she was no longer a fugitive from her own life. She was a woman with a name, a history that would not define her, and a place where she was wanted. She reached across the table, her fingers closing around Henry's hand. He looked up in surprise, then beamed as though she'd given him something priceless. Marcus watched them, his eyes bright with something unspoken. In that quiet kitchen, the three of them formed something imperfect and new, something that did not need to be named to be real. Elena drew in a steady breath, her gaze lingering on the city beyond the glass. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future that did not end in fear. A future where she could heal, where she could give something back to the people who had shown her what it meant to be seen. The rain had passed, and with it, so much of her sorrow.